Hi, I'm David Goforth with Extension Successful Gardener. Today I want to talk a little bit about landscape design and show you a few techniques and helpful hints that we do in traditional landscape design. But I will start by saying that design is opinion, and you can do your design any way you want to do it. And in fact, you should do it for yourself and not for some critic. But if you want to do it in sort of a traditional manner, let me show you a few steps. Once we come inside, the first step we want to do is develop a plot plan. This can be as accurate as you want it to be. If you get it accurate, it solves a couple of problems for you. So we'll try to do somewhat accurate. You can do it on a clean sheet of paper if you want to, but I like to use this type of graph paper here. This graph paper's got about 10 squares per inch, and you can use 1 square will equal 1 foot, and most residential lots can be fit on 1 sheet of graph paper if you'll do that. In addition, they've got these lines that run, and you can take, in this case, I'm going to use north at the top of the page here. You could, if your lot was wider, you could go wider with it, but in this case, this works pretty good to have north up this way. There's 2 or 3 different ways you can get an accurate north. You can just go out there and observe the sun. The sun will come up in the east and it will set in the west, and that will give you east and west, and then your north would be towards the top. The other way you can do it is to use a compass. Go out there with a compass and get a north from that. The other way I'll mention, what I'll use here, is actually going on the county website on the GIS page and getting an accurate plot representation. They will always run the north towards the top of the page, and this in this case gives me a line that I can draw here that's also, I know where it's at on the ground out there. And what I will do is just line this up accurately here under my paper, even with the lines, and then that will give me a angle here. I will come up to wherever I want to start. In this case, I'll just pick a point right here, and I know that I need to go about 80 foot, which measure off 80 here, and go 80 foot in this direction. And this is a property line here. Now I can get the road down this way. I'm fairly certain it runs roughly right through here, but I can get a measurement from here and go this way, and then a measurement from a certain distance there, and that will give me a fairly accurate location out here for the road. Let me just put the road in right here. And then we've got a driveway that's starting, and I can measure over the number of foot here for the driveway. At this point, we've got 2 locations here, and we can locate anything on the property by measuring from these 2 known distances. In other words, we can go from the property line over to the corner of the house, and this property line over to the corner of the house. We can locate the corner of the house at some point right in there. In this case, we've got the house is roughly here. And again, each of these points could be accurately measured by measuring from 2 distances on the ground out there. Now, this is our first step, which is the plot plan. The next thing we want to do is analyze the site. And in this site analysis, first of all, starts with the sun. We know that the sun comes up here in the east, and it sets in the west, and during the summer it's going to hang to this side. So the south side here is going to be a little bit warmer than the north side. It's going to have a little bit more sun and stay a little bit warmer. The west side is warmer than the east side, and those things there are useful in our site development. This here property leans a little bit towards the west, which is also something that we need to know. And in addition, the area down here is a little bit wetter. In fact, there's a septic drain field down in this area here. So this area tends to be a little bit wetter than this area up here, which is typically a dry area. The soil is approximately the same across the entire area. That'd be one thing you'd want to look at, is the soil, whether the soil changes across the property or not. The other thing we can look for is views, and the views we have in different directions. Some views we might want to borrow and keep those. Some views we might want to block out. So doing the site analysis, we will check with all those things: drainage, soil, views, and sun orientation. Once we've done the site analysis, the next thing we want to do rather, is come in here and develop some use areas, what the family needs. Now, in traditional landscaping, what we will normally do is we use three terms. We use the private, the public, and the utility is just a sort of catch-all categories for what we want to do here. The public area is generally to the front, and this area, if we just sort of think of a goose egg sort of in this area right here, in traditional landscaping, we will think of the house as a picture. The house being the most valuable thing on the property, and the house is sort of what we want to make as a picture. And we will leave this area open right here. Or we may have some trees here. If we need to have trees here, then we will run the tree up about 10 foot where you can see sort of through the tree, and it doesn't really block your view of the house, and then have the house as a picture is the way we typically think of that if we have a public area. Now, all these ideas, you may or may not want to do them on your particular site, but again, this is traditionally the way a lot of landscapers will think. Also, traditionally, they'll come in with a private area, will typically be in the back of the house, and you might put a goose egg back there, sort of the private area. Very typical for them to have an open inner area here with lawn, and then have the other things around the edge, you know, plants around the edge, or if you have a shed over here or a gazebo on the far side, you can even have a pathway, a hardscape pathway that runs to that, or runs to a shed or something on another side over here like this. So figure out where you want your public area, where you want your private area. Now, your utility area, you'll think of things like the dog pen will go in the utility area, or the trash cans. You want to have a place to store the trash cans, or the wood pile. Whatever your family needs, whatever your family wants to use, a place to put the bicycles, those kind of things, you want to plan for that. And you might include that in this area, depends on your site where you want to include those items. But you need to have a plan for those items. Once you've located figured out what use areas you need, and then you start locating them on your site. For your particular site. One thing we think of with the public is also the entrance. Where do we want the entrance? Where do we want people coming up to the entrance of the house? And this particular site right here, if we wanted people coming through the front door, which is, some people will, the front door in about this location here, we'd actually have to change this driveway to give them parking on this side over here so they'll come to the front door. But the entrance to access, this is one thing that you really want to consider. And traditionally, they will do it with a couple of shrubs on each side of the steps to draw attention to that particular point. If we were doing a traditional landscape, a lot of times we'll put a little bit bigger plant on the corner here, and then come up here to the steps. And typically in between, these will be smaller plants. The outside plant going no more than 2/3 of the way up the house at full maturity, and the other plants sort of staying below that level, and then an entrance here to draw attention to the entrance. If we were drawing a walkway or something to this point right here, if we wanted people to come in this particular door here. But the point is that you want to evaluate what your house looks like, what the access looks like, and figure out, does somebody know where to park and where to walk into the house to get in and out of the house. And normally we put a walkway here. A lot of walkways are only 2 or 3 foot wide. Really, you want a 4 or 5 foot wide walkway to really come into the house so two people can pass without having to step off the walkway. Is typically will look a lot better than the narrow 2.5, 3 foot walkways. A lot of times we'll balance on the other side of the building what we did on this side. In this case, we can't because our foundation's getting higher. We'll need to put a larger plant down here than we did on this side. But we'll probably put another plant here to balance this one. Balance and repetition are two things that we try to work with in landscape design. Another thing we'd want to do right here is to come in and put a shade tree. Typically in our climate, we like to put shade trees on the southwest corner, roughly about 30 foot away from the house, which would be in this area right here. Again, this one can be trimmed up so that it blocks a view, but when it gets mature, it will shade the house during the summer from the west sun, which is the worst heating sun, and increases your heating load. It will also drop its leaves during the winter when you don't mind the house being warmer. So a deciduous tree, and again come out, it's going to look like it's a long ways from the house, but really you want it 30, 35 foot away from the house. If you get it closer than that, you'll wind up spending more money keeping it out of the house than you'll save from your heating and cooling. Another thing a lot of people think about is some screening plants as a windbreak, some plants that will block the cold wind. Typically our winds will come from the northwest when they slide off of the Appalachian Mountains during the winter, but it's not that big of a thing. It's only 2 or 3 or 4 days that we really worry about that. And so typically we will not, in our traditional landscaping here, we will not put in a row of plants here. Now if we wanted an evergreen plant for some reason, we wanted to have a magnolia or something, a lot of times we'll put it in this direction here, and it will have the tendency to block those winds in addition to what else it does. We typically do not put a windbreak like you see in parts of the country to block those winds from the northwest that tend to slide off the mountains from that direction. Sometimes we can come up here and put something closer to the house, again an evergreen plant that will have a tendency, the winds come in this way, and instead of channeling it down along here, it sort of tends to block it and slow it down, coming down the actual wall of the house where it's doing the most damage. A few other things that plants can do for us. We've talked about blocking views. Plants do a very good job of screening plants. These are typically evergreen plants or plants that will block the view year-round. A lot of times on our smaller lots like this, smaller landscapes, what we wind up doing is a combination of hardscape and plants. In other words, we may have a fence that will actually do the job if we wanted to block the view in a particular direction. In this case, we want to block the view towards the back of the house perhaps. We could come in here, we don't have that much room, we could put a fence in, and then in front of the fence we could put a few plants to soften the plants. So that's another traditional way that we'll use screening plants, but we've actually used hardscaping because traditional screening plants will take up so much room, more room than we've got in that particular case. We typically use plants around the foundation of the house. Around the foundation of the house, they have a tendency to be the lower picture frame. If we think of our house as the picture here, the lower picture frame is our foundation plants, and a lot of times we'll use some evergreen plants for that. Many of our houses, our foundations doesn't look that bad, and you can break it up with both deciduous and evergreen plants, but it's nice to have a few evergreen plants in our traditional landscaping to sort of give you some interest year-round here. Once you've sort of located these use areas and started figuring out what plants would work for you, you can go in here and develop the use areas. And this is when you're actually plugging the plants in. And you don't have to do all this in one fell swoop. You can work on one particular part now, work on another particular part a year or 2 years down the road as time becomes available. But it helps a lot to have a plan to begin with to do a better job. Let's go back outside now and let's look at some of these sites on the ground. Now that we're back outside, let's point out a few of these things. First of all, in our site analysis, we're looking at the sun comes up in that direction right there. It sets right over here on the other side, directly away from us. And so south would be the way I'm facing right now. We're at about 11 o'clock and the sun is right up there at 11 o'clock shining this way. So the south side here is going to be warmer. The other side of the house is going to be a cooler side of the house. For example, if we were putting a Photinia or gardenia or a camellia, we'd probably want to do it on this side over here. If we were putting a rhododendron here, we'd want to do it on the east side over there. So that's the way plant selections are driven by site analysis. Again, this is the upland dry site right here. The far site down there is where it's wet. And let's take a look at this shade tree right here. This is an existing shade tree here. This is a pecan, probably in middle age, so it's got a long time that it can benefit us. It's sitting a little bit towards the southwest side of the house right now, so it's in the right location to give us a lot of shade, a lot of cooling in the afternoon. Being this is middle age, we probably don't have to look for a replacement anytime soon, but if we wanted to put a replacement, we could go over here 10, 15 foot away this way, and we could put a replacement tree here to give us that afternoon shade that we want from a deciduous tree. Okay, here is where, if we were wanting access to this particular door right here, we'd put a little bit better walkway, we'd change our parking area a little bit out there, and then we might plant some of our entrance plants in this area right here. We would actually want to pull them out about 2 or 3 foot from the house. Here's a good example of a plant that was planted too close. It looked perfectly healthy, it looked perfectly right when it was small, but now when it's large, it's obviously too close. The only way to solve that is to get a tape measure, measure out 3 foot, and plant your plants about 3 foot away from the house. A bigger plant, this plant's a little bit too big. Remember, we typically don't want a plant that will go more than 2/3 of the way up the house on the corners. If we're wanting the house to make the house look smaller, we might get bigger plants, but again, we need to pull them a little bit farther out if we wanted to do that. Now here in our private area, this private area, they've got a barbecue grill or outdoor fireplace or something set up right here. We've got a dog lot here. You can just look this way. Really, we're not looking at blocking the view up there. We expect that view to stay pretty good in the future, so we may not necessarily screen it right at this point in time, but we do like to give people a reason to look, and so this is where we might use a specimen plant, such as a dogwood, which would do good in this area here, or another shade-loving flowering plant. Give us some reason to look to that corner. Being our eyesight's normally drawn to that corner naturally, will give people a reason to look there, and so we might put some of our specimen plants there. We've got nice shade trees out here in the back. The shade trees in the back will do a couple of things for you. Remember, when your house is like a picture, they will give your picture something to lean against, sort of a top frame, if you will, sort of a left and right frame to your picture that you're making of your house out front. And so, again, public area, private area, you don't have to do it that way, but that's one way that it can be done. If you want some more information on landscape design, you can give us a call there at the office. We do not do landscape design for individuals, but we can refer you to some of the local nurseries and local landscapers that will be happy to work with you, consult with you, and help you make some decisions on landscaping if you need any help like that. And as always, plan and plant for a better world.